Good evening, friends. Welcome to one more session on discussion related to sociology related topics. And what we are going to discuss, we'll come to that. Before that, some basic admin announcements. So if you need any sort of guidance, help, these are some of those links which will help you. The preparation strategy, answer writing links, all these things are there. And whatever we are discussing now, it is going to be recorded. It is actually recorded, and it will be on the student portal within for us, right? And where will you find it? It's here. And for any mentorship, this is the number. So let's get started with today's discussion. And on the screen, you can see all the topics that we are going to take up one by one. The first topic is related to land tenure system. So there was this article on in EPW related to land tenure system. Now, what is land tenure system? What is land tenure? So what kind of relationship exists between individuals and land? That is the land tenure system. Right? For example, there will be someone who will be owning the land. On that land, what kind of things can be done? Who can carry out this? All these relations that are there, all these things. Who owns the land? Who can work on that land? What can be done on that land? Right? How it can be used? All these things falls under what is referred to as land tenure system. So this is what we are going to discuss. Before Britishers, what was the situation? When the Britishers came, what did they introduce? Right, in different parts of the country, they introduced different kinds of systems. What was the consequence of all these things? What was the impact of all these things? When India became independent, what was the situation? And after that, India also went ahead, the governments went ahead with a series of reforms in 1950s, 60s, 70s. From 1950 to 70s, multiple reforms were introduced. They were all referred to as land reforms. So what were the component of these land reforms? And what were some of the outcomes of that, and what were some of the limitations of that? So this is what we are going to take up as the first topic. And by the way, keep in mind that there was an article on EPW. Apart from that, if you look at our syllabus, right, there are topics which are directly linked with this. There is one topic which is called as land tenure system. There is another topic which is land reforms, right? Sociology paper 2. So all those concepts we are going to revise here. The next topic is Ranajit Guha and subaltern perspective. Now, this is interesting. See, what is perspective? Perspective, right? Many times you would have come across this term perspective. You have social reality, but the social reality might seem different to different individuals. Different people can look at the reality from different lenses, from different angles, and the view might be different. Someone might get a particular idea, notion about reality. Someone else might get some ideas. So perspective is this. Perspective is also referred to as worldview. I give you another analogy. Let's say I'm an individual. Yeah, you are an individual. I'm an individual. Things around me is the reality. Now, if I change the lens that I'm wearing, let's say I'm wearing a green color lens. Let's say I have a sunglass which has like green lenses. So whatever I see will be of a particular shade, green shade, maybe it will be greenish in color. If I change my lens, let's say wear another specs which has a reddish lens, red color lens. So whatever I view, it will seem slightly different. So perspective is this. Different perspectives will give you different aspects of reality. So what I'm going to discuss here is subaltern perspective. What is the meaning of that? And one of the thinkers, one of the researchers, historian Ranajit Guha, right? What is his approach? What is his subaltern perspective? There are many thinkers who belong to the school of thought. Ranajit Guha is one of those thinkers. And what does he say? Right? That's what we are going to discuss. The third topic is peri-urban regions. Usually, what happens? We talk about rural areas or we talk about urban areas. In fact, if you look at our syllabus, there is one topic called village studies, sociology paper 2. So village studies basically is the study of villages in India. How villages have been perceived, right? How villages have been studied. What are the different interpretations related to villages? So village studies covers that. If you look at the syllabus, paper 2 also has some topics related to urbanization. Here the focus is urban areas. What happens in urban areas? What is so special about urban areas? Right? In urban areas, you will find intensification of economic activities. You will find industrialization happening. You will find people engaged in different kinds of services sectors, tertiary sectors, secondary sectors. Right? You will find the density of population is more. Right? There will be more innovation. Bunch of things are there. So there is also a lot of literature around urban areas. So rural areas are areas of focus. Urban areas are also areas of focus. But then there are certain areas which are somewhere in between rural and urban areas, the peri-urban areas. Right? So there was this article on peri-urban regions in EPW. That's the reason we're taking it up. So these are the regions which are somewhere in between. They're not completely urban, they're not completely rural. They're in the process of transformation. Maybe at this point, they're not completely urban. In future, they will become urban. In the past, they were rural. Right? So that continuum, they're existing in that continuum. Right? On one side, if you have urban areas, on the other side, you have rural areas, somewhere in between. So these areas are called peri-urban areas. And because of the nature of geography here, they might face different kind of problems, they might face different kind of challenges. So we look at some of these problems, we look at some of these challenges, we look at some specific examples, some case studies, and we will see what possibly can be done to improve the circumstances in this particular regions. So that's what peri-urban region. New term, sometimes you get short notes on some of these new terms which are in the news. So that's why we are going to discuss it. The next two topics are very conceptual in nature. Kinship system in India by Iravati Karve. Iravati Karve, one of those prominent anthropologists. Iravati Karve, what she does is she looks at Indian society in different parts of India, and she tries to find out what is that thing which is similar. When it comes to kinship patterns, how can you find out what is that kinship pattern that exists in India? And then what he does is she actually goes ahead and carves out. She says that, okay, in this part of India, a particular kind of kinship system exists. Northern parts of India, a particular kinship system exists. Southern part of India, a particular kinship system exists. Central part of India, a particular kinship system exists. And then there is another eastern zone of kinship. So if you have to understand the kinship patterns, how people are related to one another, what kind of family dynamics are there, what kind of equations are there between men and women within the same family, what kind of hierarchical arrangements are there, you might not get a very good idea if you look at pan-India level. But if you divide India into certain kinship zones, you will get better idea. So she has done that. She has divided India into certain zones, and she's trying to find out in each of these zones what is the similarity. So that is what we are going to discuss here. The next topic: latent and manifest functions, anticipated and unanticipated consequences. So when it comes to latent and manifest functions, this is something that you might have already studied, right? When you study Merton, right? So Merton comes up with a particular approach. And he says that we need to look at functions, we need to look at dysfunctions of a system, parts of the system, functions and dysfunctions of parts of the system. He also talks about that we should look at latent and manifest functions. He divides functions into two types. So what are they? So there's something that you might have already studied, but it will be basically a revision of that. What is important is when you divide functions into these kind of categories, you get a better understanding of social reality. You get a better understanding of things around you. Right? So what are those advantages of dividing functions into latent functions and manifest functions? We'll see that. Apart from that, I want to discuss two more things: anticipated consequences, unanticipated consequences, and what is their linkage with latent manifest functions, this kind of division that you have. Right? So we'll try to club both these things together. In recent times, we have had questions which have linked unanticipated consequences with latent functions. So it makes sense to discuss these things. So this is what we are going to take up in the next 2 hours. So let's get started. The first one: changing nature of land tenure systems. So what is land tenure? What is land tenure system? Why are we discussing about land? What is the whole rationale behind all these things? As I mentioned, land tenure means, or understanding land tenure means understanding what is the relationship that exists between land and people. What can be done with the land? Who owns the land? How the land can be used? All these things are together referred to as a land tenure system, right? And what is the meaning of tenure? Tenure implies the conditions under which land is held. It also tells you what is the relationship between the owner and the tenant. Someone owns the land, someone might be working on that land. Maybe I own the land, I don't cultivate that land. Someone else cultivates on that land. But what is the relation between me and that person who cultivates on the land that I own? Right? Maybe that person will be giving me some part of his produce as revenue, or maybe I have just given that land to him on some rent, some fixed rent. I don't know that. So all these kind of relation, that all these things that are there, right? They are referred to as tenure. All those conditions that are there, they are referred to as tenure. Now, how is land significant for a country like India? Keep in mind, in India, significant proportion of people are engaged in agriculture. And more than 60% of people in India are engaged in agriculture. It's a different thing that some of them might be there in the agrarian sector, might not be contributing much, they might be disguised laborers. But significant proportion of population is engaged in agriculture. So we are primarily an agrarian society-wise, right? The number of people who are engaged. If I say we are an agrarian economy, that might be incorrect, because if you look at economy, the contribution of agriculture is minimal. It's like 13-14%. But if you look at the number of people engaged in agriculture, it's huge. Right? Majority of the people are engaged in agriculture is actively more than 60%. Now there is a linkage between land and class. Now what is the meaning of this? What is the meaning of class? Class implies the amount of rewards that you can derive from the markets, right? Your ability to derive rewards from the market, that is class. Your wealth position is class. So there is a linkage between land and class. So those people who will be owning larger amount of land, right? So their class situation will be better than those who own smaller parcel of land, or those who do not own any land. So there is a linkage between land and class. But not only this, there is a linkage between caste and land as well. So people who belong to the lower caste communities, people who belong to Dalit communities, they might not have access to land, right? So that equation also exists. So keep this in mind. At this point, we'll come to this in a while. Now, there have been different studies on land tenures. There have been different thinkers, scholars, who have tried to understand who owned land at different points of time. Some scholars are of the view, for example, Kumaraswamy is of the view that land belonged to the entire village community. On the other hand, scholars like Majumdar, they say that land was usually considered to be the property of the king. A.R. Desai says land belonged to the king partially. Rights were given to certain groups like police officers, etc. Right? So different perspectives are there. It might be belonging to the king, it might be belonging to the village community. A.R. Desai says that it was belonging to the king, but some rights were there with certain officials, certain priests. During the Mughal period, some form of formal systems are being evolved. Different offices are being created now. The entire area is now divided into different parts. Empire is divided into parganas, taluks, etc. Officers are emerging, zamindars, talukdars, etc. Monetary taxes are introduced. When Akbar was the ruler, his finance minister was Todar Mal, and Todar Mal decides that 1/3 of the average yield has to be given as revenue. And how do you compute the average yield? Average of 10 years produce. So every year, you have to pay this much amount of revenue. But over a period of time, the Mughal Empire, the Mughal Emperor's power is also becoming weaker. All these land revenue systems that they had devised, they're not working as effectively. And eventually, after Aurangzeb, what happens? Power is not there, and land is leased to whoever is willing to bid the maximum, and they have to give some fixed amount of money. So this is how things look like when Mughals were there. After that, the Britishers are coming into the picture. The Britishers are coming up with what is called as the permanent settlement. Right? So zamindari system, it is also called the permanent settlement system. It was introduced by Cornwallis in 1793, and some of the places, Bengal, Bihar, Orissa, Uttar Pradesh, some places of Uttar Pradesh, it was introduced. Now, what is this? How it is impacting? Now, at this point of time, there were people who were tilling the land, they were growing crops. Now, Britishers, they are giving ownership of land to a certain section of the population. They are not the people who were cultivating the land. So some section of the population, some intermediaries, right, are emerging now. Some section of the population, now you're saying that you are the ones who are owning the land. But what you have to do is, you have to collect revenue from the people who are tilling the land, who are producing crops from those land. And the revenue was fixed. So that particular zamindar, a new class is basically created now. Who are the zamindari class now? They are the intermediaries now. They are the intermediaries between people who are cultivating the land and the Britishers. So this intermediary has to collect revenue from them, and they have to pass it on to the Britishers. And yeah, part of it they will obviously keep it. But the amount of money that they have to give from the tillers to the Britishers, that was fixed. So that is the reason it is called permanent settlement. It is settled. You have to give this much amount of revenue for the land for which you have been bestowed the ownership. So this is what is happening. So this settlement is basically settlement with the zamindars. They are given land for fixed sum, and they have to pay the government a fixed rate, and they have the right to collect revenue. How they collect revenue, how much amount of revenue they will collect, it's up to them. But eventually they have to give a fixed rate to the government. So this is what is happening. Now, what is the impact of all these things? So, you have Zamindars, you have the Britishers, and then you have those who are cultivating the land. Ideally, what should happen in the case? The Zamindars should have collected the revenue from the tillers of the land, and then they should have passed it on to the Britishers. But that is not what is happening. These Zamindars, now they are again hiring some people in between, the sub-Zamindars, and they are saying to these people that you collect it from those who are cultivating. But again, these people, the sub-Zamindars, they are saying, okay, boss, they're hiring someone else now, and they're asking them to collect the revenue from those who are tilling the land. So now what is happening? There is emergence of a series of intermediaries, and these people, they're not at all productive. Britishers are here, those who are cultivating are here. All these people in between, they don't contribute anything. They're not contributing to the agricultural production. They're not investing in the agricultural land. What they're doing, they're taking revenue from here and they're passing it on, but they're just not passing it on. They're keeping a part of it with themselves. So basically, this person at the bottom, whatever he is producing, most of it is going to these people and then to the Britishers. There's nothing left for this individual. There's no incentive for this individual to save, to invest, nothing. That person is barely managing to survive because now there are a lot of people who are just acting as parasites maybe and who are just taking the things that this guy is producing. So you have a hierarchy of sub-zamindar, and the zamindars are charging high land revenue. In some cases, 3/4 of the produce. Imagine. So if you are producing 100 units of something, you can keep just 25 units, 75 units will be passed on to all these intermediaries and to the Britishers. All this is leading to massive impoverishment at the bottom. You don't have anything. Whatever you're producing, you don't have anything left. And in case you're not able to provide for this revenue, what will happen? You're thrown out. So next year you do not even have the land to cultivate. Right? So all these things happening. And on top of that, agriculture is becoming extremely backward. If I am not having enough resources with me, how will I even invest back into agriculture? I will not invest into agriculture, right? I will not have enough resources to pump in money into my land, or I will not be even investing in maybe some form of technological upgradation at that point of time. So agriculture is becoming extremely backward. So this is what is happening. This is one of the consequences of the zamindari system. But keep in mind that when Britishers were there, it was not just zamindari system. There were some other kinds of land revenue system as well. For example, in some cases you had the Ryotwari system. Now in this case, what used to happen was you did not have all these set of intermediaries. You had, the revenue was directly paid by the peasants to the government. Right, so peasants were directly paid to the government, and you do not have all these set of intermediaries. This was introduced in Madras, Munro, and they had introduced it back then. But yeah, it was definitely less exploitative as compared to the zamindari system. But that does not mean that it was not exploitative. This was also exploitative, but only thing is it was less exploitative as compared to the zamindari system. Here also, the rates used to be high, right? And many times the government officials exploited the peasants. And in case there was a crop failure or there is any natural calamity, whatever, they will not able to, they will not have enough production. Agricultural produce will not be there, and they will not be in a capacity to pay this revenue. So in that case, what will happen? The government will take away their land. So the land ownership gets impacted here. They are thrown out of the land. So this is what was happening in Ryotwari system, though better than maybe zamindari system, but it was also exploitative. Another kind of land revenue system was the Mahalwari system. In this, what happens is there was settlement with a village, Mahal. In permanent settlement, there was settlement with the zamindar. In Ryotwari system, the settlement was with the individual peasant. In Mahalwari system, the settlement was with the village. So village will be responsible to pay this much amount of revenue. This was introduced in again some parts of UP, Punjab, etc. Panchayat was the intermediary here, and every villager you will be having a fixed share in that. Right? And the advantage here is the villagers used to help each other out in case there was a crisis. Apart from Mahalwari system, there was this Jagirdari system as well. Right? So in this case, the zamindar was not having proprietary rights on the land, but he had the right to collect land revenue. Right? Land ownership was not given to the zamindars in this case. They were just the intermediaries who can collect revenue. So these were the different kinds of land tenure system, land revenue system at that point of time when Britishers were there. Now, what was the impact of all these things? What it led to? First thing, it is leading to proletarization of peasantry. So those who were the peasants, they are becoming extremely poor. Proletariat, bourgeois proletariat, right? This is something that we had discussed before also. So how does Marx view society? Marx views societies in terms of haves and have-nots, right? There are certain sections of the population who own the means of production, right? They are the haves. Those who do not own the means of production, but they are the ones who work for those who own the means of production, they are the have-nots. So at different points of time, you will find haves and have-nots. For example, in the ancient society, slaves and the masters. In the feudal society, the serfs and the feudal lords. In industrial societies, you will have the proletariat and the bourgeois. This permanent settlement system, the zamindari system, what it is leading to? It is leading to a situation where, again, the agrarian society is divided into haves and have-nots. Before this, there was no such concept. The peasants were staying on that land, they were tilling their land, and whatever they were getting, they were happy with that. But when permanent settlement system is being introduced, ownership rights are given to a certain section of the population, to the zamindars. So now, the zamindars own land. They are the haves. They have the means of production. Who is working for them? The peasants. Right? So society is now divided into haves and have-nots. Proletarization is happening, right? In the agrarian society, proletarization of peasantry is happening. So this is something which is new. Before this, there was no such concept like that, right? Because the peasants were tilling their land and they were producing different food grains, different agricultural produce. Next thing, land is now becoming commercialized. It is now becoming a commodity. Before that, land was not considered to be a commodity, but now it is considered to be a commodity. It is commercialization of land, right? So some people own land, and again they can now sell land, buy land. So land is becoming commercialized. So this is a new thing. Apart from that, taxes were high. You already saw. In some cases, they have to pay 3/4 of their total revenue. Right? 1/4 you are keeping and 3/4 you are giving. Just imagine if the tax rates were 75%, what will happen? In fact, in India, there have been instances where the tax rates have been at this point at something like 75-80% as well. But I mean, these are all exceptions. So that was the case here. High taxes, and people are in perpetual indebtedness. They don't have enough. They're not having enough incomes. Whatever incomes they have, it's going in the form of taxes. It is discouraging capital formation in agriculture. Very important point. If I'm not having enough money, I don't have enough money for myself. How will I even invest back into agriculture? I will not be going for maybe some methods which were better at that point of time. I will not go for any technological upgradation. So capital investment in agriculture will not be there. As a result of which, what happens? Your productivity, your yield will also be less, and you are back into that state of poverty or back into the state of indebtedness. Agriculture remained backward. Also, the land holdings, they're getting depleted. How? many of these peasants, they're not able to give that much amount of revenue. They're losing out their land. They're disposed from their land. What will happen in that case? If they're disposed from the land, the next generation, very small land, again, overcrowding will be there in that. So that is what is happening. The agrarian social structure that was there, it is now changing. Now you have a new class, zamindars, a new class has formed now. The existing relations that used to be there in rural areas, the Jumani system, that is also getting broken. And inequalities are getting widened. So the kind of land tenure system that you have, it is leading to all these kind of consequences, right? So the kind of relation that exists between people and the land, which is again created by some legal mechanism, is changing the entire social fabric. Class relations, caste relations, all these things are getting impacted by some legal mechanism, right? So this is something that I want to appreciate, right? Some of these interventions can have massive implications. Also, I want to point out one thing here. Note the places where this was introduced, right? Places like Orissa, Bihar, Bengal, and look at the situation of some of these places even now. In fact, there are some historians, some scholars, what they have tried to find out is the implication of permanent settlement, something that was introduced in 1793, might be existing even now. At present, again, the Naxalism menace has again reduced, but there was a time where you had certain places in India where Naxalite violence was a massive threat. Some of these places, they were called as red districts, red corridor districts. These are the places where Naxalism was at its peak. So some historians, some scholars, they trace this thing to something which happened in 1793. So basically, people are losing out land. They are the ones who are impoverized, right? They are the ones who might have participated. They're relatively deprived. They might have participated in Naxalism, maybe. Right? So some historians trace it back to that point of time. So this is the impact of some of these land tenure systems that we have had. So when India became independent, right? So this is what was happening. There were some unproductive interest groups, the zamindars. They were just intermediaries. They were not contributing anything to agriculture production, but they were dominant, right? So they had social capital, they had power, right? So, but they were not productive. Economically, they were not doing anything when it comes to agriculture. Similarly, land was consolidated among few hands. The zamindars, they were the ones who were owning land, right? Among few hands, the land was ownership was consolidated, but a lot of people were cultivating. They did not have any ownership rights. There was landlessness, hunger, indebtedness, and any point of time, these people who were cultivating on the land of the zamindars, they can be thrown out. There was massive amount of insecurity. So when India became independent, this was the scenario. So now what did the governments do, or what was done in the next 20 years? So the governments had formed, and in fact, before formation as well, right? Before India became independent, at that point of time also, many times these things came up. What needs to be done, right? And from 1950 to 1970s, many new things were introduced. All those things which are trying to address the problems that we saw right now, they're all referred to as land reforms. So from 1950s, 1970s, a bunch of things were introduced, and the main idea was those who are actually cultivating the land, they should be given ownership rights. They should not be this insecure. They should not be this vulnerable. Those who are unproductive, why should they be there? Right? Take away land from them. Right? Pass on the land to those people who are productive. So all those reforms, all those policies that were introduced to improve the condition of farmers, to provide for food security, to modernize agriculture, to increase efficiency in agriculture, to ensure a just society, all those things were referred to as land reforms. But keep in mind that attempts towards land reforms they were of different types. So P.C. Joshi has actually classified land reforms into various types. We'll come to those 4 different kinds of land reforms, but before that, P.C. Joshi tries to look at different patterns, different ways by which the relationship between the land holdings were changed. What were some of those things? So P.C. Joshi says that in some scenarios, in some situations, land reform happened from above. Basically, some laws were passed at the parliament level, at the level of the state legislatures. So all those reforms that happened because of different kinds of statutory enactments at the parliament level, at the state level, these are called land reform from above, right? So state legislatures. Then land reforms due to the pressure of militant peasant action from below. In some places, different kinds of militant groups had formed. Now, what is militant? Those who take up guns, right? Those who take up arms, they're referred to as militants. So in some places, militant mobilization also happened. Peasant militant mobilization. So those who are killing the land, they have been at the receiving end, they're losing out. So they themselves formed different groups and they took up arms. Example: Naxalbari movement, Telangana movement. Telangana movement, I'm not talking about the movement for creation of a separate state of Telangana. I'm not referring to that. Right? I'm referring to peasant mobilization that happened long back. So in some cases, there was pressure imposed by peasant militant groups from below. See, this is basically a legal route. Right? So different legislatures, they're changing laws. And they're saying that, okay, we'll have land ceilings. They're saying that, okay, the tenant situation we are going to improve. We have to make a law by which the tenant situation will be improved. They cannot be just evicted from the land. So all these things are happening from the top. Elites are making the law and it is implemented. So these are all land reforms from above. But in some cases, there is a pressure coming from the bottom. So those kind of reforms are land reforms from below. Telangana movement, Naxalbari movement are an example of that. In some instances, what happened was land reforms were initiated, but it was through some form of persuasion from below, but with the help of some persuasion. The prominent examples are Gramdan movement, Bhudan movement. You might have heard of Acharya Bhave, Vinoba Bhave. So what he was doing, he was going from villages to villages. He was pursuing landlords. That see, you are having excess amount of land, right? There are people who do not have land. Why not give those land to people who do not have land? So this is through persuasion, persuading different landlords, peaceful measures. So Bhudan movement, Gramdan movement are example of that. In some cases, land reforms happened through legislative enactments from above, and it was combined with peasant mobilization from below. So both things were happening. Pressure from bottom and laws from the top. So example, West Bengal, right? When the new government came up in 1967 to 1969. So new government was also there, and then there was this pressure from the bottom. So this is how land reforms can be classified. One way, P.C. Joshi's classification. Another way to think of it is, what are the different types of things that were introduced as part of land reforms? And what were the different kinds of activities that were initiated as part of land reforms? The first one was abolition of intermediaries. Right, so zamindars, they were the intermediary class. Right, they are basically not the cultivators of land. Someone else was the cultivator. They were just an intermediary between the government and British government back then, before independence, and those were cultivating land. So intermediaries will be abolished. So that was, we had different states introduce policy for abolishing intermediaries. That was one type of land reform. Second was tenancy reforms. Those who are the tenants, those who are cultivating they were extremely vulnerable. At any point of time, they can be evicted of their land. The amount of rent they used to pay, it was exorbitantly high. It was, there has to be some reforms by which their condition becomes better. So all those things were part of tenancy reforms. Next is, how much amount of land can one hold? There has to be some ceiling on that. So ceilings were introduced, but you cannot hold land beyond a particular limit. So that was another kind of land reform that was initiated. And then consolidation of land holdings. Again, small parcel of land will be there at different places. If you own one parcel of land here, another parcel of land here, another parcel of land there, someone else holds a parcel of land in between. Just think of it, right? You have land, but again, you cannot cultivate at a mass scale, right? Or you will not be productive. If you have land at one place, a larger chunk of land, the agricultural production will be more maybe. Or another way to think of it is the cost of agricultural production will be less because the land is at one place. You can use different kinds of technology here. But if you have small pieces of land here and there, you cannot use technology here maybe. So consolidation of land was again another component of land reforms. So these are the different kinds of reforms that were introduced in subsequent plans, right, from 1950s onwards. Now the point is how successful were these, right? So what we'll do is we'll look at each of these things and we'll see how successful they were and what were some of the issues that came up when it comes to implementation of each of these plans. So one by one we'll look at it. The first is abolition of intermediaries. So all the zamindars, whatever rights they had, zagidars, whatever rights they had, all these things was abolished. And again, they cannot acquire land. There was a ban on that. But yeah, what the government did was it paid compensation to these zamindars for the land that the government took from them. And new land records were created. Survey settlement was also done. So that again, so that you have new records, right? And holdings were demarcated. And most of the states passed laws, right? So 2 crore cultivators benefited from this process, right? So this was first thing. So it was relatively successful. But point to be noted here is there were some issues as well. It's not that it's completely successful. What were some of the issues? See, the government is giving money to these people so that it will take a land from them. But it was found out that in many cases, very high price was paid. And also in some situations, it was also found out that many landlords, they were able to find out certain kind of loopholes and they continue to have control over large parcel of land. And the poorer tenants, sharecroppers, their situation did not really change. And many places, whatever was the customary relationship, that continued to exist. Maybe on paper, you're saying that this person is no longer a zamindar and these people have ownership over land, but that might not exist. The customary relation continues to exist. So basically, the state is changing the law, but whatever traditions, customs are there, they continue to remain. They did not change drastically. Right? So it was relatively successful, but not completely successful. The next thing was tenancy reforms. Right? So before these reforms were introduced, the rents were high. There was you did not have any security of tenure, and those intermediaries, they also did not have any interest in the land. So now new guidelines were introduced that those who are the tenants, like those who are cultivating on someone's land, the amount of money that they have to pay, the amount of rent that they have to pay, it cannot go beyond a particular limit. So all these things were capped, 1/5 to 1/4, and so basically the tenants, the tenancy became better. Right? You do not have to pay a very high amount of rent here, and the relationship they're trying to make it less exploitative. So different states are passing regulations related to this. But what was the outcome? See, in this also, some places things were successful. West Bengal, Kerala, these were some of the states tenancy reforms were better, where it did happen. You had successful tenancy reforms, but most of the country this was not really successful. In fact, just 4% of the entire country you had successful tenancy reforms. It did not happen everywhere. And in most of the places, some form of legal loophole will be there and it continued to exist. The customary relations, whatever there, it continued to exist. The third thing was land ceilings. You cannot hold land beyond a particular limit. Now, this is also something which was not successful pan-India level. Some states they did well. West Bengal, Kerala, Jammu Kashmir. Right? So these are some of the places. Assam, it was relatively successful, but in many places it was not. There were many court cases, frequent litigations were there. Many times there was collision between landlords, administrators, politicians, and again there was lack of political will. In many places, what happened was land was given up, but the inferior quality land was given up. Right? So the good quality land was kept, and they found out different ways by which these laws can be avoided. For example, maybe within the same family, father is there, father is there, and then you have sons. So divide the land amongst themselves. As a result of which they don't the total land that they have, right, it will not exceed those land ceilings. So benami transactions are also happening. So different kinds of loopholes were used so that all these laws can be avoided. Reorganization and consolidation of land holdings. What is the advantage here? If land is consolidated, right, you can get better returns out of it. Right? You can use better technology over there. Agriculture will be more cost effective. So that is the main rationale behind it. But here also there was limited impact. Some 66 million out of 142 million hectares where you had consolidation. Some places it was more successful, Punjab, Haryana, because again there was inherent benefit over there. Consolidate the land and use it for green revolution, maybe high variety seeds. But not in many places it was not the case. Many places there were fear of displacement and there were apprehensions that if you are consolidating the land, you are also pulling in the risks. If you have land, if you have smaller parcels of land at different places, then in case there is a natural calamity or in case some of these incidents happen, right? Maybe one parcel of land will be impacted, other parcel of land will not be impacted. But if you have only one large parcel of land, the probability of it getting impacted during natural calamity increases. So those kind of fears were there, fear of displacement was there, and as a result of which it was also not very successful. So the point is, the kind of land tenure system that existed before independence, it led to certain kind of issues. After independence, it was decided that we will solve these problems. So we went ahead with land reforms. Again, it will be incorrect to say that land reforms was a failure. It did have success, but at the same time, it also had its own limitations. Right? So it was basically a mixed kind of thing. So this is how land reforms have performed. For each of these types of land reforms, again, look at both the aspects, right? What was the positive, what was the negative. So this is about land tenure system, how it has changed over a period of time, what kind of initiatives have been introduced by the government from time to time, and what has been the result. One question, this question, to some extent, I've linked it with current affairs, also to some extent with what you study in General Studies paper 3. So you have to do some amount of homework here. You have to find out what this committee talks about and how it is linked with the problems that farmers have, the problem that people who are in the agriculture sector have. According to Dr. Swaminathan committee report, land reform is an unfinished agenda. In this background, enumerate various limitations of land reforms in India and give salient features of the draft model title Act 2019 released by the year. So you know about the problems, you know about what land reforms is, you know about the status of land reforms. This is what you know. What you have to do is you have to go one step ahead. Study about the Swaminathan committee's report. Right? MS Swaminathan, he is known for his contribution to green revolution. Right? So he's part of multiple committees related to farmers, related to agriculture. So look at this committee's report related to agriculture, related to farmers. Next thing what you do is look at Niti Aayog's draft model land title act. These two things you look at, link it up with what more needs to be done right now. You know about land reforms and the problem, or land reforms and the status right now. So bring all these things together and answer it. Right. So some homework you have to do apart from the reading and all those things that you do. So this is about the first topic related to land reforms. So I think some of you are saying audio is less. I'll ensure that audio is better from now onwards. I'll try to shout as much as possible. Now the next topic is, see, you don't need, some of you are asking about PPTs. Whatever I'm discussing, it is from your handouts, right? I'm not discussing something which is completely different. Right? So you don't need the PPTs. If you are going through the handout, it is good enough. One more thing, go through the tablet lectures, right? Sometimes what I do, I link the tablet lectures with the handouts, right? So if you're going through the tablet lectures, that will also be advantageous. Vani Singh asks, what is commercialization of land? At this point of time, right? When you think of land, right, you always think that land has a price. Right? I mean, if I have to build a house, or if I have to build something, I need to have a piece of land. And for that, I have to pay money. So at this point of time, when you think of land, you cannot think that land at some point of time might not have been considered as a commodity. 300 years back, 400 years back, maybe it was not considered as a commodity. Wherever you are, go and carry out agriculture maybe. It is not considered to be a commodity which can be traded in the market. Now it is considered to be a commodity which can be traded in the market. People buy and sell land. But at that point of time, right, before 1792 or whatever, and that was not considered like that. So there were peasants who were just cultivating on that land. They didn't purchase that land, they were just cultivating on that land. But from that point on, now what is happening? Ownership rights are coming. Those who are the new class, the zamindars, they are now becoming the owners of that piece of land. They can trade that land because they are the owners. There will be someone else who is also the owner. Right? That one zamindar can purchase the land of another zamindar maybe. Right? So it is now becoming a commodity. So commercialization of land means that. How Rotwari system was exploited? See, Rotwari system was exploited in the sense that the tax rates were quite high, right? It's not that if only if there is a zamindar, things will be exploited. So if zamindar is there, yes, if there is an intermediate, it will be exploited. But in the Rotwari system also, the amount of tax that they had to give, the peasants had to give to the government back then, it was high. And if let's say they are not having enough production, if there is a failure of crops in that particular season, there's no security for them, there's no insurance for them, right? So that way it was exploited. There's one question. Harika says, can you explain proletarization of peasantry? Okay, so what is proletarization? Proletariat, bourgeois. These two terms, right? When we read Marx talks about these things. Who are the bourgeois? They are the ownership class. Who are the proletariat? They are the ones who do not own any means of production. Land is one of those means of production. Those who are owning the means of production, they are the bourgeois. The zamindars, they are the ones who are owning the means of production. They are the ones who are owning land. They are the bourgeois. On the other hand, those who are the peasants, they are not owning land. They do not have ownership rights over land. They are the proletariats, right? So they are the proletariats. Before this, what was the case? Who were cultivating in the land? The peasants. There was no such ownership, non-ownership thing, right? Land was not considered to be owned by someone. But now, since you have come up with the concept of ownership rights, there are some people who are owning it, some who are not owning it. Those who are not owning it, they are the proletariats. So this is the meaning of proletarization of peasantry. Militant means those who hold arms, right? Military weapons, militants. Many times you will come across these kind of controversy, whether someone should be called as a militant or someone should be called as a terrorist. Right? So what is the difference here? Militant is someone who holds guns, who has taken up guns. Terrorist is someone who wants to create terror, who wants to create fear, panic. That person is a terrorist. That's the difference between a militant and terrorist. So many times you will come across this controversy. There will be some journalists who will be referring to a particular incident as a militant attack. There will be some journalists who will be calling it as a terrorist attack. Right? So this is the meaning of this. So let's get to the next point. Ranajit Guha and subaltern perspective. So what is this subaltern perspective and why are we discussing it? So I had a portrait of Ranajit Guha, so I thought I should share it with you. So let's understand what is subaltern, what is subaltern perspective. Now, in any society, you will have some form of stratification. Right? Any society, you will have stratification, different layers. The stratification can be in terms of maybe wealth. The stratification can be in terms of race, gender, bunch of factors. There will be some people who will be at the bottom maybe. There will be some groups, there will be individuals who are at the bottom of the power structure. The way they view society, the kind of perspectives they have, that is called the subaltern perspective. But before we go to the perspective, think about it. Who are the subaltern? Those groups, those individuals who are outside the power structure. The subaltern, the subordinate, they're made subaltern, they're made subordinate to the hegemonic power structure. So you have some form of stratification in society. Those who are outside it, those who are at the bottom, they are referred to as subaltern. And why this kind of a subordination happens? Maybe because of economic condition. Maybe they don't have enough economic resources, they don't have enough wealth. Maybe on the basis of race, ethnicity, caste, gender, etc. So those who are outside the power structure, those who are at the bottom, they are referred to as subaltern. Now, what is subaltern perspective? The way they view things, that might be a different perspective. So that perspective is called the subaltern perspective. I'll give you an example. In Indian society, right, you have what is called as the caste system. Now, again, there is a hierarchy. There are some people who are at the top of this hierarchy. There are certain groups who are at the top of the caste hierarchy. But then there are certain communities which are considered outside this hierarchy. They're at the bottommost. When it comes to different kinds of societal privileges, they're not given that. So they are at the bottom. Now, the people who are at the top, they will look at society in a particular way. They will write about society in a particular way. Whatever things are happening, they will write it down. But the way they will look at things will be different. Just think about someone who is outside this, who is at the bottom. That person will view society differently maybe. That person's experience about the society will be different. To understand social reality, we should not restrict ourselves to what someone who is at the top is thinking. Someone at the bottom, their viewpoint is also important. They should not be just considered as an object. They are also creating history. Maybe people at the top, they're ignoring their contributions. They're saying that, okay, people at the bottom, they have not contributed anything to the society. But that might not be true. So So it makes sense to look at the perspective of those who are outside these power structures, right? So that is what subaltern perspective is. So it is basically a way to understand society from the bottom, from below. People who are marginalized, they also produce knowledge, they have their own politics. The dominant historiography or writing of history might exclude them. So we read history, but keep in mind, who is writing history? Who is keeping account of things? Most likely people from the elite sections. They are the ones who have had access to knowledge. They are the ones who became literate first. So they are the ones who are noting down things and we're reading that. But maybe their perspective is not correct, or maybe it is not reflecting the reality. So this dominant historiography means the writing of history. The dominant historiography might exclude those who are at the bottom, those who are maybe the tribals, those who are maybe from the Dalit communities, those who are maybe from those who are peasants maybe. Right? So the dominant historiography might miss out their contributions. Not just miss out means something which is unintentionally happening. Sometimes it might exclude them. So the subaltern perspective looks into those who are neglected and marginalized and contrasts it with the elitist perspective. The elites, what history they are writing, and what is the reality or what is the view from the subaltern, right? At contrast also you can get through the subaltern perspective. So it attempts to restore the historical narratives, reconstruct people's politics history. The tribals and the peasants, they make their own history. They're not necessarily just an object of study. Right? The subaltern perspective looks at all these things. Who are some of the prominent scholars from this area? Dr. B. R. Ambedkar, Ranajit Guha, David Hardiman. These are all prominent subaltern thinkers. Now what we will do is we will see Ranajit Guha's subaltern perspective, right? What all he talks about and how his approach is important, how his approach is different from the elite perspective. Right? So these are few things that we are going to look at. Now before we go into that, I just want you to reflect on a few things. Right? When we think about India's freedom struggle, right? When we think about India's nationalism, who are the people whose name comes across? Right? Most likely people from the elite sections, people who are from the upper classes, people who are from the upper caste, most likely men. Right? So we typically tend to remember those names. What could be one of the reasons? Because maybe we are reading history, and history also talks about these people. But keep in mind, history has also been written by certain people. Maybe the people who have written history, they belong to these sections and they have talked about these people. Maybe when it comes to nationalism, when it comes to creating national consciousness, there was a massive involvement of people from the bottom. Those who were peasants, those who were tribals. Maybe we have not heard about them. Maybe our history textbooks did not talk about it. Maybe the way history was written, they were excluded from it. Maybe their contributions were not recognized. As a result of which we don't know them. The subaltern perspective tries to throw light on these aspects. Right? So let's see what Ranajit Guha talks about. So Ranajit Guha says that the elitist historiography analyzed Indian nationalism, freedom struggle as an idealist venture of the indigenous elites who led people from subjugation to freedom. So elitist historiography, the elites, they wrote history, the way they are writing history. What they are doing, they're writing it in such a manner. They're glorifying that it is the elites, nationalists. They are the ones who are helping create nationalism. They are the ones who are ensuring India becomes free from the colonial rule. So they're only talking about the elites. Those who are from the upper classes, those who are from urban areas, those who are from upper caste. So elites are writing history in a manner which just talks about the elite nationalists. It is not talking about people who are possibly from the bottom section of the society. So they're talking about individual leaders, they're talking about certain kinds of elite organization institutions. And they're giving an impression that Indian nation and the national consciousness was the achievement of only the elites. The people at the bottom, they did not have any role to play. The subaltern did not have any role to play. So this is what elite historiography is trying to do. And they're saying that it is trying to glorify the goodness of the elite. It's trying to just talk about how good the elite people were. It is kind of a spiritual biography of the Indian elites. And it is not talking about the fact that the indigenous elites, they themselves used to exploit and oppress masses to fulfill their own interests. It is not talking about how they themselves were concerned with power and privileges that they were getting from the British Raj. So Indian elites might have been benefiting from the British Raj. The elite historiography does not talk about that. It only glorifies them. It says that, okay, they were good people. So Ranajit Guha criticizes this elitist historiography. Then he talks about how the contribution of the masses is important. The contribution of the masses, the people who are at the bottom, maybe people from the lower class, maybe people who are the tribals, maybe the peasants, they contributed immensely to the freedom struggle. And their contribution is independent of the contribution of the elites. And their contribution is not dependent on the contribution of the elite. It's not that the elite started contributing as a result of which the masses at the bottom started contributing. It's not the case. It is independent of that. It is not dependent on that. It is parallel to the contribution of the elites maybe. And it did not originate or depend on the elites. So maybe the elites contributed to Indian nationalism, but the contribution of the tribals, the contribution of the peasants is equally important, if not more. And this contribution is not dependent on the contribution of the elite. It is something which is independent, it is something which is parallel. Apart from that, it's talking about the nature of the mobilization, the nature of the contribution of the subaltern to the freedom movement. So the movement, protest, resistance of the peasants, tribals, marginalized groups during the colonial period varied in intensity, and the mobilization of the elite, it was from the top, while the mobilization of the subaltern was from below. The elites, right, they will be using different kind of constitutional mechanisms, maybe they will be using different kinds of legal mechanisms, maybe. But the marginalized, they will be mobilizing from the bottom. I can give you a couple of examples. Right, during the colonial rule, many tribals they revolted against the colonial rule. The different kinds of uprisings that you see, Santal rebellion, Ho uprising, Munda rebellion, all these things are from the bottom. They're not on the basis of any constitutional or legal principle, right? They are fighting. So this is again another difference here. Another difference, if I find out is most of these things were violent in nature. The subaltern mobilization was violent, aggressive, spontaneous. Elite mobilization was more controlled, more moderate. And the subaltern mobilization was also slightly different. It was on the basis of clan, caste, kinship, family network. The elite mobilization was on the basis of constitutional and legal frameworks. So these are all different differences between the subaltern perspective and the elitist perspective. And this is what Ranajit Guha brings it out in his work on subaltern perspectives. Right? So this is his contribution. So if I have to summarize, you have social reality. Social reality can be viewed from different angles. The history that you read, again, different people might have written history, might have contributed to history. Subaltern perspective is one perspective which gives you idea about the same thing from a different lens. How do marginalized people look at the same thing? How do tribals, the peasants, those who are from the Dalit community, how they look at the same thing? Their view might be different from how someone who is from a privileged section will look at it. The example that Ranjit Guha talks about, Indian nationalism, the way elite historians would have written about national struggle will be different. They will glorify the contribution of elite nationalists. They might ignore the contribution of the marginalized sections. Subaltern perspective will try to reverse that. Subaltern perspective will try to put light, will try to highlight how the marginalized, the tribals, the peasants, they have also contributed. The elitist perspective and the subaltern perspective, what are some of the differences? Right? What was the basis of mobilization? Kinship ties, clan ties, etc. For subalterns, mobilization. But when it comes to elite nationalism, what was the basis of mobilization? Legal methods. In which case, violence was used again when the marginalized mobilized. Right? So these are all different kinds of interpretations that you get from the subaltern perspective. Right? So again, in our syllabus, you do not find an explicit mention of subaltern perspective, but you have tribal movements and other things. Right? Also, Indian nationalism and interpretation of Indian nationalism, that is also there. Right? So subaltern perspective can be important from that respect. So one question here: what do you understand the subaltern view of history? Discuss with respect to the views of Ranjit Guha. Right? So the first part, you can talk about what is subaltern perspective. Again, we already talked about it. And then the second part, maybe 100 words, you can talk about how Ranjit Guha brings out the importance of subaltern perspective. Right? What finer points you can get, which you might not get through elitist historiography. So this is about subaltern perspective and Ranjit Guha. Any question at this point? Yatindra says subaltern perspective will be covered in which chapter? So again, the first part, right? The different, one is Indian nationalism. So where we study about, so basically the first part, you have Indian nationalism, right? So there you can, paper 2, sociology paper 2, first part, different interpretations of Indian nationalism is there, maybe from that angle. Another is there is tribal movements and other things, right? Which is there in section C of the paper 2. Different movements are there. From that perspective also you can, you can look at tribal movements from subaltern perspective as well. So two places. Vishwajit Naik, yes, it is something which is related to paper 2. But keep in mind that we are looking at India from subaltern perspective in this case. But it is not that subaltern perspective is not something which is used for looking at other things outside India as well, right? For example, you might analyze American society from a subaltern perspective. There may be people who are racially discriminated, right? Maybe those who are the blacks. Their view of American society will be different. So, perspective as a topic is already there in paper 1. There are different perspectives. Feminist perspective is an example of that. Similarly, you have a subaltern perspective, right? So, when you're studying perspective, one of those perspectives is subaltern perspective, and in a general sense, it can be asked in paper 1 as well. You can have a short note on that. So, Vishwajit, Ramesh, the answer to your question is when you look at India from a subaltern perspective, it will be paper 2. But if you are just looking at society from subaltern perspective, it is in paper 1. Vishal, Gandhi was subaltern or elitist. You have the answer, right? Obviously, Gandhiji was not he will not be a subaltern. He will not have a subaltern approach. In fact, many of the things that Gandhiji talked about, right, it has been criticized. Ambedkar, Dr. Ambedkar, he was a subaltern thinker. He was the one who will be looking at things from the perspective of a Dalit member, right? And many places, Gandhiji and Ambedkar used to have conflicts. Gandhiji was of the view that caste system is not necessarily wrong. The Varna Vyavastha, he was in favor of that, right? He was against untouchability. He wanted to change that, and he thought that changing the perception of the people about untouchability, making people, he wanted to reform people basically. He wanted to change the hearts of the people. But at the end of the day, he was in favor of caste system. At least the Varna Vyavastha. I'm not talking about Jati system. But Dr. Ambedkar was completely against it. Right? So Dr. Ambedkar is someone who is from the subaltern perspective. But yeah, Gandhiji may not be. Mahatma Phule, yes. Apple, I don't know who's Apple, but yeah, I agree with it. Nandini say, ask, do you need to remember the name of personalities? Ranjit Guha is an important personality. You need to remember his name. Like, he's one of those prominent historians. Right? So, if I am talking about some study, like for example, the next topic that we have, if you look at the handouts, right, many studies are referred to in that handout. You don't need to remember all those names. In fact, I have omitted some of these names in my slides.